Go.
Okay. Hello, I am Dame Calandra from the Kingdom of the Golden Plains, and today we're going to learn about Tunisian crochet. Now, sometimes this also may be referred to as Afghan crochet or the Afghan stitch. I don't really like using it with a stitch though, because there's actually a whole lot of different options for your stitches with Tunisian crochet. But some older books do refer to it as Afghan crochet though, if you're looking up for different tutorials. I have some different examples of things that I made. The pictures of the on this didn't show the detail all that great, but this one was done with Tunisian full stitch, and then I have a regular single crochet stitch on the edging, and I will show some pictures. So let me bring that up for you. Give me just a moment. Okay, well, actually that's going to take a moment to do that. It looks like that window may have gotten closed. So give me just a moment. Let me pull that up for you. Okay. All right, so I'm not going to be able to pull that up, but I can share some other pictures at a different time. So let me show some other parts of this then. Okay, so you're not limited to just straight things. This is actually a pattern that can be found on Ravelry. I don't remember which one this is because I've done several of these shawls that have different steps on them for different dragon wings. Some of them are called dragon wing or wings in some form or something like that. But there's a lot of different variations that you can do. To do Tunisian crochet, generally you're going to need a Tunisian crochet hook. They come in many different sizes, just like regular crochet hooks. But the difference is that they generally have a stopper on the end, like a knitting needle. So you have one end that has the crochet hook and then the stopper on the end. They come in different styles. That is one brand. This is a Susan Bates brand. And so it has this type of stopper on the end. This other one is not a named brand. It came from Amazon. You can buy some good sets there for not very much. You also may find some that have hooks on both ends. This is for doing Tunisian crochet in the round. So if you were trying to do a hat, you would want to have the double ended. I'm not going to show that today because that's more of an advanced thing and something that I'm still trying to master myself on it. Now, if you're wanting to try to do this on your own and you don't have a Tunisian crochet hook, you can use a regular crochet hook. You just aren't going to want to cast on a lot of stitches at the beginning because it will fall off in the end, but you can use it to practice or do some swatches for your different stitches here. Okay, so for yarn, I do find that for practicing, cotton is a good one to choose, but you can use whatever yarn that you have available. One thing that's helpful with Tunisian crochet is to actually use a hook size that's bigger than whatever gauge that the yarn is saying that it needs. On many packages of yarn, it will have a little crochet hook that's the suggestion of what size hook you should use. So you want to use one that's at least a half size or a size bigger. The reason being is that Tunisian crochet is going to want to curl. It really likes to curl up on you. There are some ways that around that a little bit. Some people say that using the purl stitch on the edges, I haven't had much luck with that one, but using a hook that's a little bit bigger will help minimize it a little bit. And then when you're done with your piece, you're able to wet block it and get it to stitch down. If you do want to make something like, say, a pot holder or a washcloth, because I know that's what a lot of people do with beginning sampler pieces, is you would want to do it to where you have two pieces that you can stitch together, and then that way you don't have to worry about it curling up into a little ball. So we'll try to do that. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the other camera so we can get started here. Okay, and I'm just using worsted weight cotton thread to start with here. So if you've done regular crochet, you're going to start off the same way. You're going to make your slip knot, and then we're going to do some chains. My way of making a slip knot is I have there we go. I have the yarn over my hand like this. Okay. I cross the short end. Sorry, trying to figure out the camera there. There we go. Just the short end over the long one, I put my fingers through the loop and pull up the long thread through the loop. And then leave a little tail that can be woven in on the end. And then I'm going to take my crochet hook and put it in through the little loop and pull down. I don't want to pull it extremely tight. You want to leave enough room to maneuver things a little bit. I'm just going to chain a small amount. So I'm going to chain 8 on here. So we're just, actually I'm going to chain 6. That'll be easier. So we're just going to go through. And I picked up an extra little piece there. Okay. So to chain, you're just putting the yarn over the hook and pulling it through the loop. And I need to start mine over because I started going the wrong direction there. So yarn over and pull through the loop. Do that 6 times. I need 2 more here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially cast on. We're going to pull up the loops. And this is why I say this combines aspects of crochet and knitting. Each row of Tunisian crochet consists of 2 passes, the forward pass and the return pass. You can also think of it in knitting terms like you're casting on your stitches and then binding off. But when you read a pattern, most of them are going to refer to as the forward pass and the return pass. And so we're working on the back side, and we're going to actually pull up the loops by going through the bumps. So you're going to skip over the first bump that you see, or the first bump or back ridge on there. And I'm going to go to the second one. It can be a little stiff getting the hook through, but you just stick the hook through, yarn over, and pull up the loop. And then you do that until you get to the last one. The last one may be a little tricky, so I'll show that one. It can be a little bit of a fight getting this first row on here. You're just going through the bump, yarn over, and pull through the loop. My yarn's trying to split on me, so it's being a little stubborn there. That happens. The last one's going to be a little tricky. It's a little hard to get the very last one. Okay. Always double check. I didn't tighten up my first stitch very well, but we can work around that. Okay, so you should have 6 loops on here. Okay, so we have our 6 loops. So now we're going to do the return pass. So this is essentially what we're about to do is kind of like chaining in a first row of regular crochet. You're going to take yarn over the hook and pull it through the first loop only. And then you're going to yarn over and you're going to pull through 2 loops at the same time. So we're going to go through 2. Now sometimes I have to twist the hook as I'm pulling through. So I'm starting, I have my hook up, but to grab the yarn, if it cooperates. But I turn it towards me when I'm pulling it through the loops. I find it easier to guide it through that way. So I yarn over. And sometimes I have to use my fingernails to try to open up that space a little bit. Pull through 2. Then yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over and pull through 2. And I got off somewhere. I have an extra one. Okay. Well, you know, that happens sometimes. Let me figure out what I did wrong. Of course, it happens when starting things. That gives us practice to do this again. But that's the basics of the starting, is that you go through and you pull up the loops and then you go back through And so the first one you just pull up and go through one, and then the rest are 2 at a time. Okay. Give me a moment to catch back up. So we'll show that again of starting over. Going through the ridges, and pulling up the loops. And if you do have any questions, feel free to speak up, or you can also put it in the chat. And a moderator will read the chat questions if there are any that come up. So this stitch that we're doing is called the Tunisian Simple Stitch. On a pattern, it will be abbreviated as TSS. Okay. Okay. I see what I did on the first row. I realized I actually skipped the last bump. That little bump right there with the knot, I actually have to go through that. And it can be very tight. There we go. So now I'm going to do my chaining essentially, where I go through one, and then yarn over and pull through two all the way across. And I'm going to switch to another piece for a moment because I used the tail. That's how that works sometimes. All right. Let me just pull up my piece here. That's how that works sometimes. Okay. So this one's set up better there. Just get lots of examples on how to do this all the way across here. And show that everybody makes mistakes at some point, and it's okay. You just keep going or start over and get it till you feel comfortable with it. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you mess up the beginning steps, how much of an impact will it have on the finished piece if you decide to carry on?
So like the one where I had skipped a stitch and was ending up with an extra one, it's going to look awkward and on the edges because you'll end up with this extra loop on the side. And so it's very important to make sure that you have enough to be able to complete the second pass correctly.
Okay, thank you.
So now, as far as the tension and such, you can work around that a little bit. I mean, you can always sew an end under or things like that. All right, so now we're ready to do our next forward pass. So this is going to be different than how we started the chaining row. So we're going to skip over this first one that's on the end. We're going to go to the second stitch. You'll see how there is a bar that's in the front, and then there's one in the back. We're going to go just through the first one. I'm going to slide my hook through the front loop. It's important to make sure your yarn is in the back of the piece. You're going to yarn over and just pull through that bar. It is referred to as a bar, the front bar. And so now I have two loops on my hook because I had that first one, because when you did the 2 at a time on your return pass, you should have ended with one loop on your hook. And so now I'm going to go through the next bar, go just through the side here on the front, yarn over, and then pull up a loop. We're going to keep going. The very last one's going to be a little tricky. So when you get to that, just hold off a moment. We'll get to that. the edge on the forward pass and the is always going to be the tricky part. But I'm just going through the bar and yarning over and pulling up my loops. I'm about to almost my last one here. Okay. So this last one, it can be tricky to see what part you need to go through. And so I'm going to see if I can find my narrow things to pull through there to show what this looks like. Okay. So I'm going to push this hook through from the back to show what we're trying to go through. It's this little edge here. It's not really like a bar. It's the last kind of loop thing on the side, really, is what it is. Sometimes it will look like there's a separating in the bar, but you just kind of go through that end piece and then pull up your loop. And then now to go back, we're going to yarn over and pull through one, and then yarn over and pull through two. So it's the same as the previous return pass, and you just do that all the way across.
Kalandra, can you pull your hands a little closer to you? Thank you.
Okay, sorry. And then I ran out of yarn, but I have another piece. We'll go over that. But that's the basic starting of the Tunisian simple stitch. I'll try to see if I can get a close up there. So it's kind of has like a waffle pattern in a way. If you look at it closely, you can see the chain in the stitch and then the bars going over it. And on the back, it kind of resembles knit garter stitch a little bit. It's not perfectly even, but it's a little bit close on that. And this is one that in some older Afghan books for making Afghan blankets, that they'll do this and then they'll do embroidery stitches over it because it's kind of creates a good base for cross stitch to be able to add cross stitch designs or names or little birds or simple flower designs and things like that on top of it. And I have a sampler that I was doing with some different stitches. That's going to show some other stitches here. I wanted to explain what they are first. So at the bottom here, we had started with the simple stitch. And then the next one I did, this is the purl stitch, which creates the little ridges. And then this is the Tunisian knit stitch. So it does have the resemblance to a knit stitch. And then I did more of the simple stitch. And then I started doing the Tunisian version of interlock, where essentially I was doing purl stitch for a certain number of stitches. Then I switched to knitting and then purling. And then after doing 4 rows of that, switching it and alternating. So since that was purl, then doing knit and the purl above the knit. So you create your little checker patterns. And so that's a simple one to start with if you start wanting to try to play with variations. Let's see. Also in here, before the knit and the simple, I do have the Tunisian full, which I'm going to show some of those stitches here. That's what I did the rainbow shawl out, is the Tunisian full. That one gets a little tricky, but we're going to go over the purl stitch next. I just need to get something started. So if you're playing along, you can either start a new swatch or you can just continue with what you have. You can transition to different stitches like I did here, just to play along. There's a nice sampler pattern out on that you can find searching with Pinterest with Tunisian Crochet that is a scarf where they go through about 20 different stitches and just do like a 5-inch section of each one. So I'm working on getting my sampler up here, or my chain up here. So we can try the next stitch here. So I'm just making my chain and pulling up things. So As you can see on this is what I'm saying. There's the similarities with knitting of, kind of treat it like casting on and binding off for your stages with those forward and return passes. And there's a lot of different things that you can do with this. I mean, I've seen scarves and shawls and lots of that, and blankets, of course. But you can also do things with designs in it, such as things that resemble Fair Isle. You can easily adapt that in, especially with using the knit stitch, and you can do tapestry crochet patterns into it. So there's a lot of different options there. As if you're wanting to do a large piece, you can get hooks that have a long cable on the end. You can also get circular ones where you do have the crochet hooks on each side and then the cable in the middle there. So it is important, as you see with things, to have an even number of loops. You do want to make sure that to be able to get things to come up right. Yes, I'm almost there for the next step here. Okay. I had to cast on a new set here. So I'm doing 8 on mine this time just to make it a little bit easier. I'm going to work on my return pass. As it will start to curl on you as you go. That's okay. You're not doing anything wrong if it does curl up. You're also not doing anything wrong if it doesn't curl up necessarily. Some people have the magic touch to get it to where it doesn't curl. I can usually get it to where it just curls a little bit, and then at the end we're able to fix it, but it just depends on what we're doing. All right.
So how would you fix curling? Would you block the piece?
Yes, blocking, and also sometimes doing an edge stitch will help. If you did like a row of single crochet around it with a regular crochet hook, or you can also do a row of like 2 rows of purl stitch around the edges of the piece. And I'm about to show how to do the purl stitch.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're starting here with our 1 loop. So this time, we want to make sure the yarn is on the front of the piece. Now I have it on the front, but I have it on the side of the bar. It's on the left side of the bar for how I'm working right to left. So I'm going to go under the front bar and then pull. So I have to think about this a moment. Make sure I have this in the right position. No, that's not right. Okay. Never mind. Hold on. Sometimes I have to think about things and order things. Okay, so I actually am going to put the yarn on the right side of the bar. I'm going to go under the bar. And so my working yarn is in between my first loop and the bar that I just went under. I'm going to pull the yarn across the bar and I'm going to yarn over and pull through the first loop. Get it not to split when you're doing it. Okay. And so for the next one, I have my yarn here in the front. I'm going to go over it and under the front bar, and then pull the yarn across. Or actually, it's probably better to pull the yarn under the hook and over. It'll be easier to grab it. There we go. And pull that up. So the yarn in front, go under the bar, pull the yarn behind the hook, grab it, and pull it through the bar. Now watch your tension, so just pull on it a little bit to get the tension. And do that again. So it is easier to pull it under the hook and over, and then grab it to pull it through. So we're just doing that all the way across here. See, it starts trying to fall in place. Okay, so I'm gonna get to that end, making sure we find that last little bar to go through. Okay, and so you should see that it's forming kind of these little circular things on the front. It's a little bit different. There we go. So I have my little kind of ridges in the front there. And so now we're going to do the return pass. The return pass is the same on any stitch. So you're going to yarn over and pull through one, and then yarn over and pull through two all the way across. The only time it would be different when the return pass is if you're trying to decrease stitches. For that, I do recommend looking up tutorials on that, because I honestly have to look that up each time to remind myself, because there are some differences on how to do it depending on which stitch. It is kind of similar to decreasing though in regular crochet. Okay, so we're going to do a row of purl again. So I had skipped over that first bar in the front. So I'm going through, I have my yarn in between that first bar and the second bar. Go under the first bar, yarn around the back of the hook, and pull through the loop. If you have any questions or need help with anything, let me know. I will stop. We're going to go making this row of purl and then do the return pass, and then I'm going to show you how to do the knit stitch. But if you look up of how to get Tunisian crochet not to curl, this is one of the stitches that they suggest of doing a couple rows of purling. And so some people will plan to start with their first couple rows as purl, and then end with a couple rows of purl, and then go around the edges with a couple rows of purling. And it does help a little bit sometimes. Okay. So I have my 2 rows of purling here. And then I'm going to do my return pass. So go through 1 and then pull through 2. Sometimes it does get a little bit stubborn to try to pull things through. Now, when we get back to the other side after doing the 2 rows of purl, you may see that your ending looks a little bit different than it did after the other stitch. But we'll still find a place to pull things through. It'll just be a little bit different looking sometimes. Sometimes it tries to just be a little different. Okay, so for the knit stitch, we want to put the yarn behind the piece again. This time, we're going to go between the front bar and the back bar and go all the way to the back. So this is where it can get a little tricky. Okay, so this is my front bar. I have my back bar. We're going to go through, put the hook, and then we always pretty much ignore the first one. There are some stitches where you may use it, but for what I'm showing, we're going to ignore this very first one. So we go through the loop, but what we're going to do is when I go through, I'm going to end up going through the space that's next to it all the way to the back. So, okay, find the best way. I'm in between the front and back bar, and my hook is going all the way back through. And that's where you pick up the yarn. So you do yarn over and you pull it through. So it's between the front and back bar. So the next one, I do the same thing. I'm going to go in between there, but I'm going to go all the way back here, and I'm going to pull up that loop. You just keep doing that all the way across. Now, I'm going to be quite honest with this. You can do a whole lot of variations, like about anything. If you go through one part and you're consistent going through that same part and pulling up a loop and then do your return pass, you'll create something. There's a lot of different stitches out there, and it's just a lot of variations of what part you're going through and what position the yarn is in when you're pulling it through, whether it's in the front or the back or what side of the hook it's on and things like that. So there's a lot of different options out there what you can do. So this is one where I have to be clear about which part I'm going to choose to go through. So the bar I need is up here at the top, and I'm going to go through that. The ending of this is similar to any other row, because on all the other rows, you're really going through the front and back bars. You're just, because there's nothing else on the side there. And you can see it's starting to form the first little loop looking like a knit stitch. Sorry, my spacing there. Okay, so now I'm going to do my return pass with the yarn over 1, and then yarn over and pull through 2. And just keep going until you get to the end. As you do a couple more rows, you'll start to see it resembling more of the knit stitch. It's always when you do the first set, you don't really see the stitch pattern yet. It takes about two full rows to get the patterns to really show. Okay, so make sure the yarn's in the back, and we're going to go in between the front and back bars and pull the yarn through again. So we're just going to repeat what we did with the previous row. As I said, your forward pass and your return pass are considered the same row. So when you're counting your rows that you're on, you factor that in. And there are a lot of patterns out there and a lot of books. You can create some honeycomb patterns and trellis and things that look like cables. There's a lot of things out there. We've even seen some stuffed animals. I haven't tried that. Now, one thing is it does not have the stretch factor that a knit piece would, or even a regular crochet. It doesn't really stretch when you're pulling on crossways like this. It stretches a little bit up and vertically, but not a whole lot. But you'll notice that there's not a whole lot of give with it. So you want to factor that in if you're making something like a hat or, sock cuffs or things like that. It's not going to have too much give. So sometimes you use a larger hook to give some more elasticity in there. Okay, so we've done 2 rows of knitting. And you see how it's starting to look a little bit like like knitting. So we have the purl and the knit. Okay. And you can continue doing that if you'd like. I'm going to show how to do the full stitch. So you have a little sampler of some variations. So on the full stitch, we're actually going to be going through the spaces and not the bars. So for this first one, I have that space between my end here and my first set of bars. So I'm just going to go, my yarn is in the back. I'm going to go through that space and pull up the loop. And then you go through the next space. This is where you have to be tricky and make sure that you're going through the space and not through the bars. And you just go through the space and pull up the loop all the way across. What it'll end up looking like is those two bars, it'll pull them next to each other. So the bars from the previous row are going to be right next to each other when you do that. So it forms like a solid line there. Now the next row when we do it on this stitch is going to be a little bit different. So hold off if you get to that before I do. We're going to go through our end stitch again, just like we do on all the others. And you're still going to do the pull through, yarn over and pull through one, and then yarn over and pull through two across. And also for reference, I'm using a 5.5 millimeter. I don't have that what that is in letters on this one, but you can easily look up charts to do that conversion. Okay. So to think about this. On the full one, some patterns may be different on what they tell you to do on the second row. For a lot of them that I see, for the second row that you're doing, you're not going to go through that first space. You kind of have the first bar is bumping right up next to the one that's your loop is attached to. So you're going to skip over that first vertical bar and go through the next loop and pull it up. So it kind of alternates which one that you're going through because they're going to be staggered on how they kind of stack. It's going to have a little staggered pattern on there.
Dame Calandra from the chat, Maggie wrote that 5.5 millimeters equals I9.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my yarn is giving me a little tricky of trying to find my spaces to go through. Okay. Sometimes you have to play with things a little bit.
That brings to mind the question, what yarn are you using?
I am using the whatever and cream, depending on what store it comes from, yarn. It can be sugar and cream, lily and cream, peaches and cream.
Cotton
Yes.
yarn. Okay, thank you.
Cotton yarn does like to split, but I have found that it doesn't curl as much as acrylic when you're trying to do stuff with this. So for the sampler pieces, I found that it was easier to work with. Other than it likes to split. And this is worsted weight. Okay, so I'm going through my spaces and pulling up the loop. Sometimes it gets a little tricky on that second one, trying to make sure that you're going through the spaces and not through the bars. So sometimes I'm just having to use my fingers to move things around a little bit. Okay, so on this one, do have, getting to the end, there is a way to get through there. There is a hole to be able to go all the way to the back to pull through. So that ending side is always the tricky part. Okay, actually, I think, no, I did not need that. Okay, that was too many. Oops, okay. Sorry, this one is one that sometimes you go through the end one and sometimes you don't. I do not need to go through the end one. Okay, yes I do. Okay, never mind. I'm gonna go back and pull that up. As we're counting how many loops you have on the end, on there is good. Because when you're getting ready to do your return pass, you should have one more than the number of stitches that you have. Go through one. At least on this one, that's how it works out. And going through two. Now I may be wrong when I get to the end. We'll see. Okay, no, that was. Okay, no, I was right the first time. I did not need to go through the end. See, sometimes you make mistakes and you just go back through and you fix it. I just pulled out the yarn and I'm going to go back and my loops are still there, so I'm going to pull them up. I apologize for any confusion there. So the full stitch is a little different on things. Okay, so I did not need to go through the ending. I had my space, and so that was correct. So we're just going to pull through everything here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now on this next one, I am going to start with that first space again. So pull that through. I find this one slightly more complicated than the other ones that we've been going through, just because you have to remember to alternate with the rows on where your starting place is and what the last loop is that you pull up. And so it's a little bit different, but it creates a nice effect on things.
What happens if you don't alternate and you just always go through that first one?
It kind of will create some extra stitches. You may have one row that has more stitches than the others.
Mhm.
It's my understanding on that, because if it's not alternating right, you end up, one may have an odd number of stitches. I could be wrong. If it works for you, then okay. But it may lay differently too. But there are a lot of variations. Like even with the simple stitch, there's like a modified simple stitch that goes through things like slightly different. I don't remember how I did it, but I know I have a blue shawl out there that was done with that stitch, and I'd have to look at the pattern again to remind myself. But if it works out, go for it. There's a lot of experimentation you can do with things. But there's my ending sampler thing. And if to end things, it would treat it just like you would with other crochet. I just take that last piece of yarn, I'm pulling it through the last loop on there, and then you would weave in your ends like you would with any other fiber work on that. And then you can do whatever edging you want. See, this one didn't start curling. because I had the right things with it. But if I were to try to keep going farther, it probably would start. But I do have, on this one, I have pearls as my beginning because I didn't do the simple stitch on this sample. The other sample, the last row that I ended on was trying to curl up. So sometimes it'll curl up on both sides for you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.